The human mind is a master architect. It can build the most incredible things, but it's also a master at building prisons. And I'm not talking about prisons with stone walls and steel bars. I'm talking about prisons built from something way more powerful, way more convincing: logic. We can actually reason our way into these perfectly designed cages and not even know we're trapped. In fact, we often think we're making the smartest choice possible. I should know, because I built a fortress for myself.
This sentence, right here, for years, this was my mantra. This was the perfectly logical, totally sound argument that I used to justify my own misery. And it sounded so good, didn't it? It sounds responsible. It sounds noble even. But what it really was a cage. And the craziest part is how rational it all felt. This wasn't me being emotional or rational, or at least that's what I told myself. No, I really believed I was operating from a place of pure intellectual calculation. I saw it as this simple, kind of tragic equation that I just had to solve. My reasoning just felt so airtight, like a simple, brutal piece of math. On one side of the scale, you have my authenticity, and on the other, you have my mother's actual life. So what's the choice? It felt like the only responsible, logical, and even loving thing I could do. My own unhappiness was just the price I had to pay to keep her safe. And then, one day, sitting in a therapist's office, a question came that changed everything. It was so simple, but it started to pull at the very threads holding my fortress together. And it introduced this terrifying new idea. What if my rational thinking wasn't rational at all? What if I wasn't being logical? I was just being scared. My therapist, she actually gave this problem a name, a concept that just brilliantly explains how our minds can play these tricks on us, how we can believe our deepest fears are actually our sharpest logic. The phenomenon is called contamination.
So here's the deal with contamination. It's basically what happens when old programming, the rules you got from your parent ego state, or these deep, deep fears from your child ego state, when that stuff seeps into your rational here and now adult mind. And this is exactly why we can know intellectually what we should do, but still find a million logical reasons not to do it.
And this analogy just nails it. Think of your rational adult mind as this amazing, top-of-the-line water purifier. It's supposed to give you clean, objective data about what's really going on. But if that filter is cracked, if it's contaminated, all those impurities, the old fears, the old prejudices, they just flow right on through. And you drink the water believing it's perfectly pure, because you've gotten so used to the contaminated taste, you don't even notice it anymore.
All right, so let's get a little more specific here, because this contamination isn't just one vague thing. It usually speaks in two very distinct, very deceptive voices that we mistake for our own rational thoughts all the time.
Okay, so on one side, you've got parent contamination. This is the voice of inherited rules, of prejudices, of all the shoulds. The everyone knows that kind of thinking that we just accept as fact. But on the other side, you've got child contamination. And this is the voice of pure fear. It takes a potential concern, something like mom will be upset, and it catastrophizes it into an absolute certainty: mom will die. And that one was my prison. And this is exactly why contamination is so powerful and so dangerous. It makes these old programmed beliefs feel like they're objective facts. It makes any idea of change feel either incredibly risky or just morally wrong. It completely blinds you to any other possible outcomes. And the absolute worst part? It makes staying miserable feel like the most intelligent, responsible decision you could possibly make. Okay, so if our logic is contaminated, what do? How do we start cleaning up the water? Well, this is where it starts to get really empowering, because there are concrete strategies for this. There's a toolkit I learned that helps you start to identify and filter out your own contamination. Here it is, the Decontamination Toolkit. It starts simple. You question the absolutes. Anytime you hear yourself thinking always or never, then you ask yourself, hold on, whose voice is this, really? Is this my rational adult self, or is this my scared child? Then you actually test reality, instead of just accepting the worst-case scenario. And this next one is huge. You learn to separate what you feel from what is actually a fact. And finally, you get an outside view. You check your logic with someone you trust who isn't stuck inside your head. So let's bring this all the way back around. I took this exact toolkit and I applied it directly to that logical prison that had kept me trapped for so many years. It was finally time to analyze the architecture of my own cage. And this is pretty much exactly how it went down.
I started with that core belief: coming out will kill my mother. First question, is this a fact or is it a fear? Well, obviously it was a fear. Okay, whose voice is this? It's my terrified inner child, 100%. So that forced the next question. What are the other possibilities that my fear is blinding me to? Well, she could be upset but adjust. She could surprise me and be supportive. She could struggle but not die. And just like that, the conclusion became stunningly clear. The real risk was not her death. It was her disapproval. A painful risk for sure, but a survivable one.
And this, right here, is the most important takeaway from this whole thing. The goal of decontamination isn't to magically become fearless. The fear of my mother's disapproval didn't just vanish into thin air. But for the first time, I could see it for what it was. It was a feeling, not a fact. I could finally separate the impurity from the water. And in that clarity, I wasn't just reacting to some old catastrophic script anymore. For the first time, I could make a real choice.
So I'll leave you with this. We all tell ourselves stories, and a lot of them are disguised as pure logic. They feel smart. They feel responsible. They feel completely airtight. But sometimes they're just really well-designed cages. So the question is, what logical story is keeping you imprisoned?